Hi. We're going to talk about decision making, something that we all go through every day, and certainly in businesses. There's individual and group decision making. So essentially, decision is choice made from available alternatives, and we'll talk about rational and non-rational decision making. So rational decision making, it explains how people should make decisions, and it assumes that managers are going to make logical decisions that'll be optimum to furthering the organization's interest. However, we know that we are not necessarily um, rational people at all times. Um, so we get into this whole idea of, it's because we're humans, and so we have emotion, and that doesn't always necessarily play in. So there's 4 steps to rational decision making: identify the problem, come up with alternatives, evaluate them, and select a solution, and then implement and evaluate this chosen solution. So the rational model, as I mentioned, is a little bit of a problem that we don't always have complete information, and if you can find complete information, that that you should try to obtain complete error-free information about all the possible courses of action. That it's logical and unemotional. That there's no prejudices or no secret agendas, and that's the best decision for the organization. But as I said, because of the human element, this is often very difficult. So again, what are some of the hindrances to making rational decisions? They're complex, time and money. Everybody has different abilities, values, and habits. Imperfect information. We have information overload, different priorities, conflicting goals. Even though we talk about making sure that everyone's on the same page, again, it's basically human condition in terms of different priorities and goals. So non-rational decision making assumes that decision making is nearly always uncertain and risky, and which makes it difficult for managers to make optimal decisions. And this whole idea of the satisficing and intuition, we're going to talk about that. So bounded rationality also, we talk about this idea that the ability for people to make decisions is limited by complexity, time and money, and cognitive capacity or ability to think. And satisficing, as a consequence of that, you come up with the best idea, not necessarily not it's the easiest one. It's not the best one, but it's the easiest one. They just find one that's satisfactory, but not necessarily optimal. Intuition model essentially is making a choice without conscious thought or logical reference. So essentially, it's this idea that it stems from both expertise, so your experience in it. The more time, like let's say you're a waitress and you see a table that's coming along, and you need to decide how you're going to approach that table. That's based oftentimes on intuition. It's based on your expertise in the field and knowing, based on past experiences. And then also that you have this involuntary emotional response to the same matters. Kind of like a hunch. It's based based on what's happened in the past. So intuition is actually a very valuable tool. You should always trust your gut, and then kind of keep track of how successful you are with what it is. And then kind of challenge your intuition. Is it this the right thing to do, not the right thing to do? So rather than automatically accepting your thoughts, challenge them. So thinking of counter arguments and then challenge those counter arguments. Okay, so we're talking about ethics. Ethics, of course, are very important. And we talked about ethics in Chapter 3. It's the standards of right and wrong that influence behavior. And oftentimes there's someone's trained about ethics in the workplace, and you sort of follow an ethics guideline. And there should be, again, as we talked about with with ethics, setting up having a what do you call it, like ethical codes of ethics and that kind of thing. Okay, so again, here we go to the roadmap. It's the idea of ethical decision making. There's the decision tree, and it's a graph. We'll take a look at this. So you create a plan to reach a goal. So the first question is it legal? Yes. Well, if no, if it's not legal, you don't do it. Is it legal? Yes. Does it maximize shareholder value? is it ethical, that kind of thing. Now, the other question that they talk about with other things, oftentimes people will talk about with ethical decision making, is it legal? Is it right? Does it help as many people? And would you want what you're doing to be published in the paper or for someone else to know about it? All right, there's also this whole idea of evidence-based decision making. So yeah, looking at what do you know at the moment. Also, you can also often say that physicians participate in evidence-based decision making, just looking at what's going on at the time, not trying to forget about everything else that's going on around you. So there are some implementation principles in terms of evidence-based decision making. So treat your organization as an unfinished prototype. Leaders need to think and act as if their organization were an unfinished prototype that won't be ruined by dangerous new ideas or impossible to change because of employee or management resistance. Don't brag, just the facts. It's the idea of people have these over-the-top assertions about forthcoming products. See yourself as an organization as outsiders do, and it's a good idea to have a blunt friend, mentor, or counselor that can help you see and act with better evidence. Evidence-based decision isn't just for senior executives. Best organizations are those that everybody is guided by their responsibilities to gather and act on quantitative and qualitative data and share the results with others. You still need to sell it, so you still have to say, have to identify a preferred practice based on solid, if unexciting evidence, then use vivid stories to grab management attention. You always want to slow the spread of bad practice. It might be necessary for you to ignore orders to be wrong or delay in their implementation. And then just better to slow down and make sure you're doing the right thing. And then what happens if people fail? If failure hurts, it's embarrassing, and we'd rather live without it. So there is no learning without failure. That's very important to remember. No learning without failure. So what is it? Why is it that it's hard to be evidence-based? Because frankly, there's too much evidence. Oftentimes there's too much evidence. There's not enough good evidence. It doesn't necessarily always apply. People are going to try to mislead you. There's no doubt about that. You often are trying to mislead you. So because you have this idea about what you want to have happen. So you're not necessarily ignoring what's going on. And then sometimes the side effects of it, for lack of a better term, are going to outweigh the process of it. And then oftentimes this whole idea of stories are more persuasive anyway, that those anecdotal things as opposed to hard evidence are what's going to influence people. Okay, so business analytics, it's a sophisticated form of business data analysis, so portfolio analysis, time series forecasting. When you take finance, you probably talk about that. And then predictive modeling, again, using data mining to predict future behavior and anticipate the consequences of change. So marketers use data mining to predict what it is that's going to happen with their customers. There is this idea of big data. Big data is not only corporate databases, but also web browsing, data trails, social network communication, so it can be internal or external. And then big data analytics is taking all those things and trying to get them with some sort of, making some sort of sense out of them. Okay, so what are some uses of big data? Analyzing consumer behavior, improving hiring, tracking movie, music, and TV data, exploiting farm data in terms of growth charts, that kind of thing, health and medicine, aiding public policy. Big data is used in all of those fields. All right, so there are just general decision-making styles. So it's a combination of how an individual perceives and responds to information. So it could be the value orientation, so how much versus say their task and technical concerns or on people and social concerns. So are they interested in helping the people out, or are they the employees out, or are they interested in actually getting the task done? So, we concern for tasks, concern for humans. And then tolerance for ambiguity, that's just this idea in terms of how well do you deal with things that are vague and not concrete? Okay, there are 4 decision-making styles: analytical, conceptual, directive, and behavioral. there is a test you can take to determine what your decision-making style is, and it's actually worth it to take that test. You can probably Google that, and or look on the Blackboard site. I will try and post it on the Blackboard site. So again, it's important to understand yourself, and how you make decisions. It can increase your ability to influence others in the decision-making process. We talk a lot about decision-making process and influence of personality and organizational behavior. So it helps you to better understand yourself and also to better understand others in the workplace when you're understanding decision-making styles. So, all right, and then there are essentially also there's also barriers to decision-making. I think that people see them in everyday life. This idea of relaxed avoidance, relaxed change, defensive avoidance. So relaxed avoidance is taking no action, and belief that there's going to be no negative consequences. Relaxed change is realizing complete inaction will have negative consequences, but opts for the first available alternative. It kind of goes back to this idea of satisficing. Defensive avoidance is you can't find a good solution. So you kind of procrastinate, pass the buck, deny the risk, blame it on someone else, and then panicking. It's the idea of like you've ignored it so much that and you've wasted so much time that no one can do anything about it. Okay, it's very important that you have to decide. So. In deciding to decide, a manager agrees that he or she must decide what to do about a problem or opportunity and take effective decision-making steps. And 3 ways to help you decide whether or not you want to decide are to evaluate the importance, credibility, and urgency of the situation. So how important is it? How believable is the information about the situation? And how quickly do I have to act on it? Again, these are also things you can think about in your day-to-day life as well. Okay, so this idea, too, of 9 common decision-making biases. So availability bias is this idea when managers use only information that's readily available from memory to make judgments. Representativeness bias refers to the tendency to generalize from a small sample or a single event. When people seek information to support their point of view and discount data that do not, it's a confirmation bias. When managers add up all the money already spent on a project and conclude it's too costly to simply abandon it, it's sunk cost. Tendency to make decisions based on an initial figure is anchoring and adjustment bias. Overconfidence bias is the bias in which people's subjective confidence in their decision-making is greater than their objective accuracy, so thinking more from their own perspective, not from an outside perspective. Hindsight bias is a tendency of people to view events as being more predictable than they really are. Framing bias is a tendency of decision makers to be influenced by the way a situation or problem is presented to them. And then escalation of commitment occurs when decision makers increase their commitment to a project despite negative information about it. It's also similar to the sunk cost bias. Okay, group decision making, how to work with others, it's really important. So you have to be able to, in terms of making a group decision, there are many benefits to it. You have a greater pool of knowledge and information. You have different perspectives because we all come from different perspectives. There's intellectual stimulation in the conversation that occurs back and forth. There's better understanding of the decision rationale, so you can defend it more when you move outside the decision. People say, why did you do it that way? You can say, well, these are the things we talked about. And then there's also usually a deeper commitment to the decision. So those are some of the advantages. And then the disadvantages to group decision making is that oftentimes there's one person that dominates or intimidates, particularly if there's people from different levels of the organization. Satisficing, again, is coming up with what's good enough, not necessarily the best. Goal displacement is when you get sidetracked and start thinking about something else. Although the primary task of the meeting might be to solve a particular problem, other considerations may rise to the fore, and so rivals try to win an argument. And then groupthink, very dangerous, occurs when group members strive to agree for the sake of unanimity and thus avoid accurately assessing the decision situation. And that's very, very scary. That's also known as the mob mentality, groupthink. Why are you doing it? I don't really know why. I'm just doing it because everybody else is doing it. There's all sorts of symptoms of groupthink. It's this idea of there's a sense of invulnerability, that you can't be touched. People tend to rationalize, that it protects the pet assumptions underlying the group's decisions from critical questions. The illusion of unanimity and peer pressure, it's very, very scary. Another way of saying that a member's silence is interpreted as consent. And if people do disagree, peer pressure leads other members to question the dissenter's loyalty. And that's the whole idea of wisdom of the crowds. So groupthink's pressure to conform often leads members with different ideas to censor themselves. It's the opposite of collective wisdom. And it's the opposite of collective wisdom, that people are, that you're just thinking about what the group is doing. You're not doing. There's no critical thinking. Okay. So what is it that managers need to know about groups and decision making? Essentially, groups take longer because there's more people. There is an ideal size. It's usually 5 to 7, and odd groups are best because if there needs to be a vote. You want to make sure that they're not too confident, and you want to make sure that you have enough knowledge in that group to give enough information to make a good decision. Okay, so what are 3 practical guidelines when a group can help decision making? When it can increase quality, increase acceptance. This idea of making sure everyone knows what's going on, and there's commitment there. And when it can increase development, if people can be developed through their participation, managers want to involve those whose development is most important. Okay, so consensus, group problem solving techniques. It's when members are able to reach and express their opinions and reach agreement to support the final decision. That's very important. And then brainstorming is this idea that people just come up with ideas and there's no wrong idea. You can have multiple ideas, multiple alternatives. So with rules for brainstorming, it's this idea that you should defer any kind of judgment. Everything is a good idea. You build on everyone's idea. You encourage the craziest, wildest ideas as possible. And there's one conversation at a time. Okay, there's also the Delphi Technique. It's this idea that you physically disperse experts who fill out questionnaires to anonymously generate ideas. And then you combine them together to sort of have one sort of general consensus. It's usually initially was used for technological forecasting, but now it's used for all sorts of different kinds of planning. Delphi Technique. And then there's computer-aided decision making, that you put in a variety of different information and through the use of artificial intelligence, essentially using their best knowledge, that the computer comes up with an option. Okay, so that's it for decision making and chapter 7, and we'll see you back here for chapter 8. Thanks, guys.